Thanks again all for taking the time today to take part in this water data forum. Um, this edition, or this is one edition of a year-long series of interactive web sessions that explores a broad range of topics around the collection, management, and use of water data for impact. Today's session is focused on smart water equity, thinking about how water data and big data particularly can be applied to issues of environmental justice, access, and other issues of equity. The Water Data Forum is a program of Cleveland Water Alliance, the Midwest Big Data Innovation Hub, and the Water Environment Federation. So on behalf of this collaborative, I'd like to thank you for joining us today on our journey to demystify water data. If you enjoy this session, I encourage you to tune into next month's, which I'll be plugging at the end of today's session. And you can check out the full list of sessions which will be running throughout 2021 on the Cleveland Water Alliance website. So thanks again for joining. As we go through today, it'll be facilitated as a pretty traditional panel conversation. So we'll be having some questions that our facilitator will be serving to the panelists and having that conversation. But we also want to make sure that there's plenty of time for audience Q&A. So throughout the session, please feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A box that should be showing up at the bottom of your screen. If you have any trouble finding it, please feel free to post in the chat, or you can message Samantha Martin or myself, who will be on kind of providing technical support. But this way, if you have a question that comes to mind, you can pop it into the Q&A and you won't forget it. We'll make sure to circle back towards the end of the session. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce today's guest facilitator for this particular edition of the Water Data Forum. SeMia Bray is the managing principal consultant for Cray Consulting Group Incorporated, as well as the co-facilitator for Black environmental leaders. SeMia is a strategic business consultant and thought leader with a passion for cross-sector knowledge exchange and facilitating real conversations. She engages leaders in innovative thinking. Over the past 20 years, she's provided consulting services in the private, manufacturing, and nonprofit sectors. As a veteran of the U.S. Army National Guard, SeMia has honorably served our country for over 6 years. SeMia is currently engaged in the nonprofit sector as the local director of Emerald Cities Cleveland. In this role, she participates in moving forward an agenda aimed at achieving a successful transition to a sustainable, resilient, prosperous, and equitable economy driven by safe and renewable energy. She is actively engaged in the social justice community as previously as director of institutional advancement at the Urban League of Greater Cleveland. And she holds a master's degree in operational systems design from Baldwin Wallace and a bachelor's from Ursuline College. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce SeMia as our guest facilitator for today. And I'll have her introduce the rest of our panelists. SeMia?
Well, good afternoon, Max, and good afternoon for all of those who are listening today and have joined us in this amazing conversation around equity and technology. So today we have on our panel a very distinguished group of panelists. Our first one is Christine Boyle. Dr. Christine Boyle is the director of Xylem's Metering Insights Group. Her work focuses on developing decision support software that achieves both resource and financial sustainability goals for water utilities. She received a doctorate in water resource planning in 2011 and spun a water analytics company, Valor Water. Out of her thesis work at University of Northern Carolina at Chapel Hill, she is vice chair of the Cal Nevada American Waterworks Association and a trustee of the American Waterworks Association Management and Leadership Division. Another panelist that we have with us today is Mr. Eric Schwartz. Eric Schwartz is a co-founder of Blue Conduit and a professor of marketing at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. With over 10 years of experience in data science and predictive modeling, he is a pioneer in the realm of predicting customer behavior. Recently, his focus has been on applying his expertise in data science for public good beginning with work on water quality and infrastructure issues related to remediation efforts in Flint, Michigan. His efforts have been recognized by many as the standard for identifying lead service lines, and we look forward to that conversation. Our next panelist is Ms. Letitia Carpenter. Letitia Carpenter is a program manager at the U.S. Water Alliance, a national nonprofit organization advocating for policies and programs that build a sustainable water equity future for all. She works on the Alliance's Equitable Water Future programs and has years of experience leveraging across sector partnerships and collaborative data practices to inform environmental justice initiatives. Before joining the Alliance, Letitia worked on community-centered data initiatives in both the nonprofit and the public sectors to ensure equitable access to environmental and community benefits. And then our fourth panelist, Mr. Greg Landell, is a Franco-American social entrepreneur and the founder of City Taps. He is a feminist and a humanist. He studied engineering in the United States at Princeton, MIT, and Columbia University, and worked in software at San Francisco and Kampala before moving to Paris in 2005, where he became an expert in the water finance nexus in developing countries. This is how he developed his vision for City Taps, which he launched in 2015. So I think you can see that we have an amazing group of panelists today before us. And so we're going to kick it off with Letitia by asking, what is water equity? And can you give us some insight on that? Because we know it can mean different things depending on who we're talking to. Letitia?
Thank you, SeMia, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I'm honored to be on a panel of such amazing experts, and I hope we can have a great conversation today. I want to start before defining water equity and talk a little bit about how we at the Alliance usually define equity in general. So we use the following definition. Equity refers to the just and fair inclusion of all people, a condition in which everyone has an opportunity to participate and prosper. So equity is not the same as equality. As opposed to equal distribution, the equity framework recognizes that we don't all start out at the same place, and we need different kinds of support and resources to level the playing field. So equity for me really means acknowledging that due to our country's history of racial injustice, there are serious disparities in wealth and health outcomes between white communities and Black and Brown communities. And I think we will only have equity when the outcomes you aren't able to predict the health and wealth outcomes of a single individual based on their race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, or other defining characteristics. And one way that this applies to our conversation of data today is those with access to data have the power to determine what we do with it and how it will be used. So we the data nerds in this conversation and beyond get to decide if we will use data to advance equity or to perpetuate injustice. And so then to move to what is water equity, at the Alliance, we published an Equitable Water Future national briefing paper in around 2017. And in it, we defined 3 pillars of water equity that I want to share with you today. The first pillar is that water equity is achieved when all communities share when all communities have access to clean, safe, affordable drinking water and wastewater services. The second pillar is that when water equity is achieved when all communities share in the economic, social, and environmental benefits of water systems and the large-scale investment that comes with those. And the third pillar is water equity is achieved when all communities are resilient in the face of floods, droughts, and other climate risks. And throughout all of these pillars, a theme that I want to highlight and that we really embed and push for the Alliance is that all of this type of equity will only be achieved if communities have a role in decision-making processes related to water management and water services. And with that, I'll pass it back to SeMia and our other panelists today.
Excellent. Thank you, Letitia. And that, that helps me think about a lot about the work that I do at Cray Consulting Group. We do our work at the intersection of democracy, the environment, and equity. And in that spot where they intersect, it is a place where all of the pillars that you spoke about absolutely matter. That we see that it is important for that community voice to be engaged, but at the same time, it's also important for our legislators to be involved, and then all of those partners in between. And so as we think about our next question, which I'm going to ask the other panelists to think about, is what is the role of water data in water equity? Because we don't always think about those things together. It seems like it's an either or, but I think what we're getting to today is that it's an and. So Christine, why don't you start us off? Can you talk to us about the role of water data in this conversation of water equity?
Thanks, SeMia, and thanks, Letitia, many of us are building on the shoulders of U.S. Water Alliance and the foundational work you've done. So appreciate all of that. So we're here talking about water data. I think, aside from the data piece, how we recognize water equity often is when it's missing. So, if you've ever had your water shut off, if you've ever been walking down the road and encountered some really bad smells, that's when your water equity may be missing. When you're, not feeling clean or having access to a shower, something like that. Like those are all part of when water equity is missing for individuals. So, SeMia, coming back to the data question is what I see data as being important is kind of tying together what's happening in our communities with it being actually quite visible from what I would say kind of an analytical sense. Like, what if we could actually publish how many water shutoffs are happening in a community? How many kind of sewer overflow events are happening in a particular community? Different kinds of incidences around massive pipe leaks, exposure to raw sewage, things like this, is that the more data we have and the more we can share it, and I'm talking kind of from the utility level out to communities and with communities, we can kind of really increase visibility. And when you increase visibility is when you can compel action. And so as we go through this conversation, I guess I'm saying the first step here is let's understand where we are, measure it. And then from there, there's a lot of work to do, but data helps us kind of take that first step.
Excellent. That makes a lot of sense. Understanding where we are, measure it, and then look at action. Eric, I'd like to invite you to join this conversation. What do you see there when it comes to the role of water data in water equity?
Thank you, SeMia, and thanks to the panel and U.S. Water Alliance, as well as CLEWA. This is a terrific group, and glad to be in comfortable territory with data nerds who care about equity in water. This is great. This is awesome. So I think from my perspective, what it means to me, what equity and water data really means is that it highlights that the equity issues that we're talking about with water that are exposed through data really are at the core of environmental injustice and also at the core of large-scale decision-making in water and infrastructure at a national or perhaps international scale. And when dealing with the data and water in particular, the very issues that we're dealing with in water and the negative health consequences have come about because of a long history of racism, of inequality. And we can see that in the numbers. We can see that in the data. And ignoring that blinds us to what's actually going on in the data and blinds us to better decision-making going forward. I think specifically, from my perspective, we started out of research, much like Christine did at the University of Michigan and now are in Blue Conduit, but we really started in the backyard, just less than an hour away in Flint, Michigan, where issues of equity were clear during the water crisis. That's what water inequity looked like to me. Is people afraid to drink out of the tap because, well, it was poisoning them for years with lead. It was some people have bottles of water, some people have filters, some people don't. The representativeness of the information was not equal. There were better historical records of materials of service lines that were lead in some neighborhoods versus others, and we can see that on the map. Another key component is not just that representation, but also the second of empowering individuals. And for me, that has looked like things when individuals and communities ask basic questions and can't get answers. Like, do I have a lead pipe coming into my house?
Yes.
Does my grandmother have a lead pipe that's her straw of drinking water? I would like to know. And when that data does become available, and there is a public map as there is now in Flint and other cities, that is empowering. And that allows individuals to have more agency and actors to ask and say, why haven't you gone down this block where it says these 5-6 houses probably have lead? Why aren't you there? And I think that is water equity.
Thank you, Eric. And that, you really bring up a wonderful point, because you're talking about different decisions and access to different things being available to different people based on the demographic that they might represent. But you elevated it to a place, and I'm really excited about this. It's a wonderful transition to our next presenter, where that this isn't just a United States issue. This isn't just something that we recognize in Michigan or Ohio or other places in the United States, but the conversation around water equity is a dynamic one. And we also see it at the international level. And so I'd be interested, Greg, what are your thoughts around what is the role of water data in water equity from an international perspective?
So first, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to share what we do at City Taps with you, and how we use data to help 1 billion people, or at least we'd like to help 1 billion people access running water in their home. Because there are indeed problems in the United States, but globally, you've got 1 billion people who live in cities where bringing water to them is not rocket science, just takes laying down a pipe, pumping some water, and they don't have running water. As a consequence, they pay a triple tax in poverty, a tax in time. It's mostly women that fetch water. A tax in money. The water will cost 10 to 100 times what it would cost if they were consuming it from the tap. And a tax in health, because the water that's carried in jerry cans or carried by tankers is never the same quality as the water that comes out of the pipe. Even when the pipe water itself is not 100% safe to drink, you still need it to wash your body, to wash your clothes, to take care of menstrual hygiene. You need all these things that are really important and that affect women and girls disproportionately in developing countries where we work. So now, what do we do with water data? Our vision is running water in every urban home. And what we've developed is a smart pay-as-you-go water meter that helps people access water in their home, even when they're very, very poor. And I mean people who live with less than $1 a day for a family of eight. Okay, I'm talking really poor. Okay, and those people are able to pay as they go for water, which means to say that they top up their meter, they have water for as long as they have credit, and then when it shuts off, just like a prepaid phone, they top up again. And we find that people who have very, very limited means are able to access water sustainably over time, and therefore be good customers for the water utility, and therefore be people that the utility is interested in serving, right? And so giving the power that's associated with the Internet of Things, the data fluxes that go back and forth, etc., to people at the very bottom of the development pyramid, people whose alternatives are walking half a mile in the middle of the night to fetch water from the hypothetical, water point, and possibly getting assaulted in the meantime, etc. The alternative is I pay with my mobile phone For those of you who've heard of M-Pesa and Orange Money and these sorts of mobile payments, you don't need a smartphone, you have a basic phone. You don't even have to be literate to use it. So we're really dealing with equity and leveling the playing field here. And so you top up your water, you have water. When your credit is off, you re-top up, and within half an hour, you have water in your house. So for us, the data is about proving that people who have very limited means are good clients to the water utility. And as a consequence, that the utilities can serve these people and break even, which is what water utilities need to do in order to be sustainable. Otherwise, you end up in this sort of death spiral that you see in water utilities, where there's lack of investment, which inevitably affects the poorest before it affects the richer, which is how you get into a situation like Flint, Michigan, as far as I know, at least, right? So documenting these flows of cash that go against the water, including from the very poorest, and through our solution, ensuring that the rich people, in fact, are forced to pay as well and cannot just be delinquent on their bills, because they're the ones who owe the most money because they're consuming the most water. So ensuring this payment equity by everyone, right, through the data flows and through the digital solutions that we offer, is essential to, in the end, proving that the utilities can finance themselves, and they can therefore have the money that they need in order to make the investments to serve everyone, right? Because until you prove that, you're in this sort of absurd situation, and hold on to your hats because these numbers are big. This billion people who don't have running water at home right now, every day they spend $323 billion a year in time wasted, health costs, and unfair, abnormal fees for the water. $323 billion. That is 3 times what the amount that you need to invest in order to reach SDG 6, which is the one that talks about equal access to water for all. So we're literally washing money down the drain.
Yes.
And it's undocumented. There's no data for it. We can't see where it is. When instead we could be leveraging this cash through digital transparent systems and leveraging this cash in order to make the investments that are necessary so that people have water in their house. Now, I understand that in the United States, people have water in their houses. But can you imagine what you could do in Flint, Michigan, if the utility of Flint actually had the money to renovate it had its own money. It didn't have to go begging to the government of Michigan for subsidies. It would no longer be a matter of arguing with the people in Lansing, right? Or in Detroit or wherever. It would now be a matter of we in Flint are generating the revenue that's going to take care of our own system. And we'll have the power to do that. And not only that, but we can document it, we can prove it.
Wow.
Here it is. Here's the pile of cash. Lend us money against it so we can be independent.
Greg, you have given us so much to chew on right there. Thank you. I feel full. I'm glad this is during the lunch hour because that was tremendous. I mean, all of you gave us so much to work with from different perspectives, but yet they all go back to where Letitia started us, which is all communities having access. So whether they're domestic or international, all communities sharing in the benefits. Each one of you talked about how data assists all communities in sharing in the benefits of water equity. And then the third pillar, I think, Letitia, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said that all communities can be resilient. And so as you talk about, Letitia, I want to ask you, was there any other thoughts that you had around this notion of the role of water data and water equity as it relates to what you've heard your colleagues speak to?
Yeah, I have a lot, and I'll just share maybe one example of how data has been used to advance equity in one of the cities we work with at the U.S. Water Alliance that I think is just a rock star example of kind of pillar 3 around all sharing in the benefits and of water systems. So the example I want to talk about is the Louisville Water Equity Task Force team.
Okay.
Yeah, the wastewater utility in Louisville use data to help them address disparities in contracting and procurement, because they first did kind of what many of us have talked about, a comprehensive data analysis of the disparities that existed and uncovered what was happening. And they found that 97% of their contracts were going to white men, which means that the communities of color, the businesses of color, the small female-owned, women-owned businesses were not sharing in the benefit of that large-scale investment. And to kind of put it in perspective, that that utility alone is set up to invest something of around $4 billion over the next 20 years. And 97% of that, if no changes were made, would go to white males, which is inequity. So they were able to use the findings of this study to push for more equitable practices as it relates to contracting and procurement, workforce development, community benefits, so on and so on. And to just share two specific examples of what came from that study and how they were able to leverage it. Their leadership championed the approval of a formal community benefits policy for construction-related services, engineering, and professional service contracts. And they, which I think is really amazing and want to highlight, created a chief equity and compliance officer to oversee so they invested and prioritized staff time and money towards that, didn't just come up with a policy and let it sit on the shelf. They also created a position, the Director of Community Benefits and Partnerships, to help assist in this work. And their board approved an enhanced supplier diversity program to create more opportunities for underserved groups to work with MSD and ensure the benefits of their billion-dollar capital programs would be shared equitably. So it really pushes for an increase. It increases the goals they have for utilizing the services of minority-owned businesses. And they're also doing even crazier and exciting data work that's really relevant to the crisis that we are still in right now and the exasperated unaffordability that people are being met with. And they're working with Promise Pay, which is an online digital payment plan system service that in response to COVID-19 expanded their services to working with wastewater and water utilities. And they've used that platform and the data services that they provide to give out upwards of $2 million in CARES funding and help sign 11,000 people up that were for payment plans or affordability services that they didn't know needed their help, without Promise doing the data work to show that they needed their help. And there's so many other great examples that I'll share if we have time. Wow. But I really just think that Louisville is such a rock star in really showing the power that we have in the water sector. And their work is now expanded not only from that wastewater utility, but there's a task force across the city of Louisville that they're helping shepherd and lead around how to use data to uncover inequity and push for real policy change.
So that is a common theme that I'm hearing throughout everyone on our panel today, that data, and I have to tell you, usually I'm in rooms where it's all about the passion, and sometimes we have data, but to be in a room where the data and the passion and the equity are showing up equally, this is a very rare treat. And we had lunch earlier with all of that good information. I think I'm ready for some dessert. So as we move into my next question that I'd want to put before, I'm going to ask Christine and then Eric and then Greg to kind of respond to this one. And it is, what is the future of water data and water equity? And so, here's my magic wand. I'm going to pull it out here if you all will allow me to. My magic wand. And if I, based on the technology of what you're using now and the data as it's coming forward, and if I took my magic wand and I went across like this, give us a preview, if you will, a taste. My dad taught me, he said, you want it to almost be like honey. It's so sweet, you just can't help but lick your fingers, right? Take us to that place in the future, if each one of you will, based on the technology that you're utilizing. What could that future look like for us? And how might our world be just a little bit better because of the data and the technology that's being employed. So I'm going to ask if Christine, if you go first, and
Okay.
then Eric, if you'd go right after, and then Greg, if you bring us home, and then we'll move into question and answers from our attendees. So Christine, please share.
Thanks, SeMia. I'm like dessert, honey, magic wands. This is really getting good. So
Good.
and I was a when I owned my own business, I was certainly a recipient of many of like women-owned business equity allocations across our country. So big fan of women-owned business, minority-owned business, sort of special policies that help as a bit of a levelizer. So there's so much in this conversation. I'm like, there's a lot to go into. So like I said before, I think that data right now needs to be used to help as, shining a light on the areas where we need to make like kind of massive improvements to equalize around water equity, and going into the pillars of access, affordability, benefits, and resilience. Data right now, whether it's through a mapping exercise or a survey, the examples in Louisville with the benefits piece are really good, but we need to shine a light and understand where there's sort of a disproportionality, and utilities and communities, cities and governments need to invest. So that's what I hope, like if I have a magic wand, I'm hoping that that's happening now, like that we're starting that effort. But I did want to point to kind of more futuristic, and at Xylem, we have a bunch of companies that are all my founder colleagues have brought into Xylem over the last 3 years, fairly recently. And what we're trying to solve for with data that's pretty interesting is this kind of collision course of kind of rampant affordability issues across our country, where people, if you think about like even, Cleveland and the Great Lakes major cities have massive infrastructure bills that they're facing. Keeping those lakes clean, replacing really old pipes, investing in treatment, replacing lead lines, like Eric's talking a lot about, it's expensive. And then on the other side of that is that communities where median incomes are not really moving, maybe stagnant or going lower. So the future of data, what we're really excited about is to kind of replace conventional investments in infrastructure through optimization, machine learning, AI, and use data to kind of revolutionize how we build and manage our actual infrastructure. So this is going to kind of fall into the resilience pillar. But what I'm excited about is that like maybe we can take our multi-trillion-dollar bill for replacing America's infrastructure and make it a quarter of that, because we have kind of analytical data-driven techniques so that we can help solve the problems in an affordable way. So that's going to be my magic wand, SeMia, where I'm excited to see things going.
Excellent. Eric, what about you? Talk about the future. What does the future look like from your perspective?
Well, I'm going to build on exactly where Christine left off. And I think that optimize to revolutionize the way that we manage our infrastructure, that recognizing that we're on a collision course where the enormous task at hand and bill at hand is going to come due for the next generation and in the next decades. But the affordability just is getting worse and worse. And for us at Blue Conduit, what we really aim to do is to bring clarity by using data science, to bring clarity to that uncertain decision making, to use machine learning and statistics and AI to find, for example, in the first area we're working, to find and replace lead service lines in communities like those in the Great Lakes region and really all over North America and beyond. But the goal is to do so more efficiently and more equitably, so that we can help communities get that bigger bang for their buck, so that when you're spending tens or $100 million and beyond, and tens of billions, as it will be for the US, just to dig up and replace old lead pipes that shouldn't have been there in the first place, it means that with better data, we're going to be spending money to replace lead and not to keep digging lots of holes and disrupting streets and homes to just find that, oh, there was copper buried there all along. that with data and using data and predictive methods in a more equitable way, we can make decisions that are made to prioritize the areas of highest need. That might mean that areas where there are most vulnerable populations, the areas that have the least ability to afford to pay for the remediation on their own, to level the playing field, as we've talked about, as Letitia led us off by thinking about. And what we've been doing is hopefully proving out that we can have a future like this by working with communities, not just in Flint, Michigan, but now we're working with Toledo in Ohio. Even as a Michigander, I'm willing to say, loving Ohio and really excited
across the line, man.
We'll see what happens next week in March Madness, but we'll ignore last week, SeMia. But okay. I really am passionate about the way that we can use data, but specifically to have an eye towards transparency. And I think the future of data and equity with an eye towards transparency is going to be key, because we heard earlier that the visibility, I think you said, Christine, will compel action. And those with data, I think was said earlier, have the power by opening up, not using off the shelf, purely, out of the box software, but really opening up that box and showing folks, this is what's going on. These are why the decisions are being made the way they are. It doesn't need to be a mystery. And that way we can build a relationship between data and trust in our systems and in so communities own these decisions and processes.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. You touched so many salient points, and yes, it was sweet to the mental taste. But yeah.
SeMia, can I add a little to what Eric was just saying, just really quickly? I think something that I know from you, knowing the work that all of the panelists are doing, that this is a part of it, and I just want to make sure to say it out loud and highlight that moving towards a place where it's not collecting data from, but collecting data for communities is really what a lot of us are saying right now and pushing for. And traditional data collection processes are really extractive and exploitative at their core if they are not done with community members and done in concert with those being most affected. I just wanted to call that out as a really, gold standard for what equity could look like, is working with community to make the future that we want to see, and involving them in our strategies.
Yeah, Letitia, and as I asked Greg, I'd love for you to weigh in on this also, is that it sounds like we're really getting to the core, the center, which is, why is this important? And it's important that data be transparent, because it's important that people in all communities have access to clean water, whether they be in the United States or they be international. Greg, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the future of water equity and data.
So I founded CityTaps with a very simple goal, right?
Okay.
I never, ever, ever, ever want to see another picture of a brown woman carrying a jerry can on her head. I don't care how photogenic and how much it tickles the donor's bones and whatever. I really can't stand it anymore. It's the 21st century. The Romans knew how to do running water. There's no reason that we should be funding and suggesting solutions for people in developing countries that we would never accept or tolerate for ourselves here at home. And yet you'd be surprised at how complicated it is to push that point across. In part, because we have to leverage utilities to do this. And utilities have a bad name, especially in the United States. You've got 50,000 different utilities with very different levels of managerial, rectitude and transparency. And part of the problem is the lack of data, right? And the lack of
that on purpose.
And it may be on purpose. It may, I'm a naive and sort of nice kind of guy, so I don't think they're out there to get me, right? I think that they're not able to do it. That's why we don't have the data. But maybe I'm too generous, And my experience in developing countries is that, utilities are losing 30 to 70% of the water that they produce, which by the way is the same in the US.
Yes.
Okay. They're collecting their bills 6 months to 24 months late, which not that different from the US. Okay. And so there is no clear notion, even to the management of the company, of where are our leaks, what would it take to fix them, so that we could have more water to serve more people more of the time. Because outside of the United States, there's a real supply problem, right? There's just not enough water all of the time to serve everyone. There's not so much a problem in the US. But there's also this notion of where's our money, right? Where has it gone? All this money that we're paying for this service. Remember, you don't pay for water, right? You pay for the service so that it comes to your house. This is really important for people to remember. So we're paying for this service. Where has our money gone? And what could we be doing with this money that we're not doing it? So the international financial institutions like the World Bank and the IFC and those people have insisted that developing countries separate the accounts of the water company from the rest of the government.
Okay.
It's not something that's the case everywhere in the US, right? So there's data there. There's at least you can see the financial flows going against the money flows.
Yes.
But until you systematize this exchange of data, until you can actually trace it transparently and say, the water utility has collected X billion Kenyan shillings or X billion Zambian kwachas. And those Zambian kwachas can now be used to secure a loan from the bank, because you can actually track them every single day that someone is making a payment. You can follow it, and it can be transparent, and it can be, anonymized. Obviously, we don't want to know that Mrs. Smith is paying 10 and Mrs. Foster is paying 7. Like we don't want to know that, right? But we want to know that the payment is coming through every single day. And what are we going to be able to do with this money? Because in the end, unless we invest massively, and here I go back to what Eric was saying, there's going to be more and more decrepit systems in developed countries, in rich countries. This is true in Europe as well. And there's going to be failure to provide to all these people in developing countries, especially as urban exodus continues, right? So this level of transparency, financial transparency, is essential to ensuring that the financial flows can come to meet the demand. So, I have a much more basic problem, right, that I'm trying to solve. People simply don't have a water tap.
And what does that look like for you in the future? It looks like that everyone.
In the future, everyone has one.
Okay, yes.
Right? Everyone has one, because we know where the money's coming from, and we can leverage this $323 billion that people are spending, are wasting.
Invested.
And we can use that to invest and meet the need.
Okay.
Sorry, I thought I was being clear, but clearly I needed to loop it back to the beginning. I apologize.
No apologies needed.
So it's the knowledge of these, because, okay, so if you're a water utility in Kenya, for example, and you go to the bank and ask for money and ask for a loan, they're not going to lend you money because your accounts look like a disaster. In part because you inherited debt from a previous regulatory setup. It's complicated. But if you can prove that these 5,000 customers are generating X many million Kenyan shillings, then you can borrow against those X million Kenyan shillings that these customers are generating. Right? And you can do something with that money. You can extend your network, you can maintain your reservoirs, you can do whatever it is that you need in order to create access to everyone. And bring running water to every urban home, which is what CityTaps is here for.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, we have a robust team of folks. I want to thank the panelists for our discussion so far. I don't know about you, those who are watching, but I have gotten really energized around this conversation. I've learned a lot, things that I wasn't aware that were available from a technology standpoint. And also, I think a few ideas have been sparked for me as well. So I'd like to go now to some of the questions in our that the participants have asked. So one of them is, what significance do you think education, in parentheses, has in improving water equity across the globe? And we have quite a few questions here. So I'm going to ask our panelists if you want to address that, if you could give us maybe the 30-second to 1-minute version of that so that we can get to as many of our questions as we can. So the question is, what significance do you think education has in improving this? And I'm going to ask Eric if you would start us off on that one.
You know what? I think I clicked by accident. Greg, why don't you go ahead? I think I saw your hand going up.
Yeah, so 30 seconds. People need to realize that they need to pay for service for water so that the service is sustainable in the long term. And I think that goes especially for the richer population that consumes more water. So that's key to education. People need to be educated that they need to conserve water, of course, that it doesn't grow on trees, it doesn't fall from the sky. It's actually produced in a treatment plant in a factory, right? And then 3, they need to understand what are appropriate uses for water. And by that, I mean that some of us live in climates or environments in which it makes sense to water your lawn. In others, maybe you should have a rock lawn, So I would say those are our 3 things. And the 4th thing I would say is that the fact that you have water at home does not mean that somebody else does. And so ensuring that you have this community of purpose is really essential. And understanding the plight of those that don't, I think is going to go a long way towards motivating the investments that are necessary.
Wonderful. Thank you. Eric, were you going to weigh in on that one or?
The next one.
Okay, Christine.
I think about when I've gone out and talked to, I'm a member of, many different groups, of scientists that are trying to help improve local water systems and get involved. And something that you can do is that you would go to your local water board meetings or your water district meetings. And so like relating that to education, I think that the more people get involved in science is really helpful. Cleveland Water Alliance has an awesome group of citizen scientists. They're going out and measuring local water quality and using their different, kind of laboratory equipment to measure water quality. Understanding how metrics work can help you when you go in front of a water board or get involved, that you could understand, what you would expect as far as, lead line replacement or affordability or rates of shutoffs. So, some of these underlying, mathematical science helps make you feel really more confident, getting up there, getting in front of the water board, making a speech, writing a letter, all those things I think education is part of and is really empowering.
Wonderful, thank you. So we are, believe it or not, it's been like a magic carpet, right? We are less than 10 minutes from the conclusion of today's session. So I think we have time for maybe one more question and for maybe 1, 2 to answer this question. And then I think we will be at the end of our time together today, but most certainly not the end of our work together in this regard. So the question that we have here is, besides consumer confidence reports, beside consumer confidence report, there isn't today really any policy like public right to know requiring democratization of water data for communities. Nonetheless, real-time data that is actionable for communities. Hardware and sensors and cloud platforms exist today to create data of scale, but without policy, it seems unclear how to bring these solutions to market. So we're weighing multiple things there. How can technology providers, data creators, be thinking about kickstarting this form of a market perspective? So Eric, I think you wanted to take a shot at that one.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that it's a terrific question because there are technologies, there are people who are data creators and ideally, as Letitia mentioned, not extractive data gatherers, but actually doing so collectively and through engaged community processes. But to truly democratize, we do need policy to regulate that, to force utilities and engineering firms to do what we know will make a more equitable world, a more equitable water data world. I want to call attention actually to one policy that looks to be changing, and that's the US EPA's lead and copper rule revision that actually now has a requirement that all water systems make public their inventory of the materials of their service lines, the ones connecting your water mains to the home. Now, that's a great step. What does make public really mean? Well, it doesn't mean that it's real-time data. It's not real-time inventory and water flow. It's not quite that. It also isn't even specifying that it's a map or that it's interactive or how frequently it really is updated. Is it only once a year? And it's those kinds of really precise, specific futures that we can imagine. What might it look like if we had certain utilities and communities getting out in front of this and saying, we're going to have the greatest, most accessible, public, transparent mapping of all of our water infrastructure that is built with community input, that is like all of the greatest user experience, user interface research that tech can afford, but done with the purpose of creating transparency and equity in water and democratizing that kind of data. Well, that's the kind of technology that I think we actually can do and have right now to do. But good policy and innovative folks in this space.
Wow, Eric, that was wonderful. Thank you to each one of our presenters today, Christine, Greg, Eric, Letitia. It has been amazing. I hate that our time has been so short, but yet it has been so full. So I'll pass it back to Max now to say thank you for letting us have this conversation. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share just a little bit about what the future could look like. And it's my hope that together we can continue this mighty work together. So Max, we're giving it back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, SeMia, and thanks to all the panelists for really contributing to this amazing conversation today. As SeMia said, it's provoking a lot of thoughts for me and, a lot of excitement as well. I just want to plug really quickly some upcoming events or opportunities that folks might be interested that are in attendance today. So I'm going to share my screen real quick one more time. Oopsies, there we go. First and foremost, if you enjoyed today's conversation, I want to invite you to come participate in the other sessions in our Water Data Forum series. Not all of them are focused on equity, but all of them are focused on different topics of water and data. So the next session that we'll be facilitating is focused on cultivating regional resilience, particularly with respect to water, data, and climate change challenges at scale. So that'll be our April session, and it'll be really focused on, how does water data inform regional climate resilience and strategy around that. There's also another series of opportunities that we at Cleveland Water Alliance are really excited to be diving into this week, actually, which is around our open innovation challenges. We just last week released a couple of requests for technologies in this area of water data and water innovation. And one of them actually ties really directly into some of the conversations for today, or I guess actually both of them do in their own ways. So one is going to be focused on point of use contaminant detection. So this is a request for technologies for folks who might have tech that could be applied to detecting water quality at the tap so that residents and consumers can understand the quality of their water and detect if there are issues. Obviously, that could have some equity ramifications. If low-income Black and brown communities in the US could know when their water wasn't safe, we would have a lot of really important information and also defray a lot of the fear that exists around water systems. And the other challenge is focused around lead service line detection, specifically remote sensing of buried lines. So if you want to check out those challenges, there are webinars this week on the 17th for point of use contamination, and on the 18th for lead service line detection. And you can find more information about this on the Cleveland Water Alliance website under our Innovate tab. And please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about this. We'll be sure to include these in our follow-up email to y'all. But that's pretty much it for me. Just wanted to make sure that we shared a couple of upcoming opportunities. So with that, I'd like to thank again SeMia, our facilitator, our great panelists, and of course, all of you for attending the session today. Thanks for participating in Water Data Forum, and we hope to see you back next month. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Bye now.